Hello and welcome to the Foundation Certificate in People Practice webinar on the new assessments. So this webinar is directly related to the assessment brief for 3 Core 002, the Principles of Analytics, and the assessment ID is for CIPD 3C002 2401, which is released in July 24. Next slide, please. Okay, the aim of this webinar is to provide you with practical advice and guidance on completing the Principles of Analytics assignment. What it aims to do is give you some pointers and provide some advice and guidance to look for the right sort of resources that you need to successfully complete this assignment. Next slide, please. So I want to commence with just a unit overview. Just to put some context before you start the assignment, this unit of assessment looks at how people professionals make both straightforward and complex choices as they perform their roles. It focuses on using diverse ranges of analytics and evidence and how this is essential to rationalization and enhancement of working practices, particular people working practices, and situational decision making in order to create value. Next slide, please. So first, I'd like to commence with just some insights that you'll see within the assignment brief. These are there particularly to help you prior to the start of the assessment. I would strongly recommend you access these and have a look at these. So really, the insights provide links to the various fact sheets and guidance that are available that guide and assist awareness and understanding of the various topics related to this particular assessment. So it's a really, really good starting point in terms of getting a scaffold of information before you start to undertake the assignment. Accessing these will give you a really useful introduction on the areas that are applicable to this unit of assessment. Next slide, please. So let's talk about preparing for the assessment. This is what I always call getting started. This is really where the hard work starts, because what you've got to do before you actually start putting the assignment together, you've got to get a lot of information, which is ironic because this is what this assignment is all about. So I'm just going to give you some pointers here. So the assessment brief outlines precisely what you're expected to do. It's really useful to read over this a few times, and I always used to do this: read it, leave it, read it, so you fully understand. Some people highlight with highlight pens, clear points, what you need to do. But this allows you to have a clear understanding of the assessment requirements before you actually start. It's also useful at this point to read and familiarise yourself with the unit specification. So get access to the unit specification to look at what the unit specification is detailing you to do, because this will give you greater detail of the unit content. And you'll see in the unit specification, underneath each of the unit assessment criteria, which you'll see as AC, you'll see indicative content. Now, the indicative content is quite important because basically it's not an absolute, but it's a guide to see what the learning content of that AC is asking you to do. So it's always good to use that as a pointer as you're going through the assessment to see if you're covering the AC and parts or all of the indicative content. But I would strongly suggest, if you're unsure of anything before you proceed, go and get further clarification, from a tutor or somebody, a practitioner, to guide you on it. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk about reviewing the relevant resources. And I think this is really, really important, because this actually is the difference between having a acceptable assessment to a really good and strong assessment, because the ones that actually receive the higher marks are the ones that have done deeper analysis and research into the unit's content. So really, it's quite obvious, but before starting the assessment, it's important you develop sufficient level of knowledge and understanding of the subject matter or matters. Beyond using the CIPD insights, which we talked about, look at the learning resources list in the unit specification, as these will point you to the relevant books, journals, online resources, podcasts, and websites that will allow you to build up the necessary knowledge required to complete your assessment. There's key writers on this subject, and these are the areas you should be picking out. Use key indicative textbooks, as these will give you the coverage of the areas that you're looking for. For the foundation level standards, the People Practice, a complete guide 2021, which is published by CIPD Cogan Page, was written to cover the units in the CIPD associate level standards. Chapter 2 relates purely to this subject. And I just want to give a caveat here, just be mindful if using web-based content to ensure that it comes from a trusted source. And also, I just want to underpin that with it, if you're using web-based content and it's actually relating to key authors or key academics, cite the work to them, not the website, because it's their work you're drawing on. Next slide, please. So when you go into the assessment, you'll see the introduction, and this is often called what I would term setting the scene, because we give a scenario for the assessment. And in the case of this assessment, it's your manager has asked you to prepare an information sheet to give an intake of new practitioners to the People Practice team as part of their induction. The aim is to showcase how evidence-based practice and analytics are used by the people function to inform and assure sound decision making. And that really sets the scene. That's the context of what we're actually asking you to do. So the key thing to take from this is think of the audience. These are new practitioners, and basically moving into the People Practice team. And as part of their induction, you're going to give them some tastings of what analytics and evidence-based practice is. So next slide, please. So now, just before I go into individual ACs, I want to talk about the actual assessment. What is the assessment structure, basically? So the assessment requires you to respond to all ACs in the form of an information sheet. I'll come back to information sheet to just give you some clarity on that. Generally, an information sheet is an informative document. However, there's no prescribed format to present in the assessment other than a brief introduction to set the scene. So you might do an introduction to say this is for the new practitioners, etc. The main focus really should be that you're covering all the assessment criteria, as this is what you're being judged against. And for this assessment, there's two sections that are captured in the one document. Section 1, which is a 1,500 word recommended word count and covers ACs 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.6, 2.1 and 2.2. And section 2, which has a 500 word recommended word count and covers ACs 1.4 and 1.5. Just for assistance, it's useful to signpost throughout the coverage of these in the assessments, as this will make the assessor to gauge the coverage against each of the ACs. Next slide, please. So what I want to do now is focus clearly on each of the individual ACs. So we'll commence with AC 1.1, which asks you to explain what evidence-based practice is. And we just added a little bit more context to say is how this might be applied within the organisation. So here you're required to explain what evidence-based practice is. I just want to stop there because it's a big subject, evidence-based practice, and it comes from often the medical, it's often seen within the medical terms, but we or the medical practitioners, but we are actually asking you to do it in terms of context of a people practitioner. So a useful model, and if you go to the CIPD fact sheets, you'll get plenty of information in terms of how evidence-based practice is used and what processes are used to actually stipulate what evidence-based practice is. So if you use a model or you use a small example of what it is, this will allow you to build and respond around the components of the process and how it is relevant and applicable to people professionals. Within this response, you should also identify these evidence-based practice approaches can be applied in organisations to inform objective and fair judgment outcomes. Next slide, please. So the next one I'm going to talk about is AC 1.2, and this is you need to explain the importance of using data in organisations and why it is necessary to ensure that data is accurate when determining problems and issues. Against this AC, what you really need to do is explain the importance of using various data forms in an accurate and true manner to determine problems and issues. Stress the impact that data forms have on organisational culture, performance and perception. So obviously we have good data that are positive and really enhance engagement, but also we have negative data that sometimes can cause stress or cause some form of negative outcomes or negative responses. So use examples such as positive and negative results, say from a staff survey, high staff turnover, which affects business, obviously conflict's a big one, change management, poor performance, etc. Next slide, please. This is AC 1.3, and this requires you to explain the different types of data measurements that people professionals use. So for the coverage of this AC, you need to explain the various forms of data that can be used to enable decision making. And generally, we break this down into two areas. These can be qualitative forms, which are expressed in numbers. We often get data sets, and data sets in large amounts can be quite confusing because they are just a pattern of data. So these are often what we call labour turnover patterns, absence rates over time, EDI data, absent rates over a period of time, as I explained, and often these are converted into statistics to make them more meaningful, and I'll talk about that more in the second section. The other form of data, which is qualitative forms, these are often in written form, which are based on narrative meanings that can often give us themes and patterns. And this could be or include records of discipline and grievance investigations, performance appraisals, exit interviews, capturing employee voice, etc. And there's various tools. If you've got lots of written data, there's various tools that will look for keywords that will pick up patterns, but we're not asking you to do that in this case. We're just asking you to do some simple understanding of what the data patterns are telling us in terms of written form. So next slide, please. So this is AC 1.6. Explain how application of agreed policies and procedures inform decisions. So for this AC, you need to explain how evidence taken from policies, procedures and practice inform decisions. Really, it's about express awareness of the types of people-related policies and procedures that support and drive a customer-focused strategy in providing clear and fair regulations and guidelines. You know, how standardized are the policies that are being used? You know, is there any underpinning of law, legal aspects that will actually ensure that the policies are communicated fair? And also now and then you might need to review your policies to actually respond to a change in legislation or a change of process. So underpinning that, it's about the degree of consistency, compliance and transparency. How well do policies and procedure define the philosophies and values of the organisation, and how well do they actually permeate how employees should be treated? Next slide, please. This is AC 2.1, explain how people professionals create value for people, organisations and wider stakeholders. For this AC, you need to explain the role that people professionals play in value creation for the organisation. I just want to stop because I always think that HR don't actually really communicate how well they link people practice to business practice. And this is what this is all about, basically. So you need to really state how you create value for the organization. And the evidence you can use for this is through examples such as throughout the employee life cycle. For example, supporting and maintaining, ensuring robust selection and hiring of new employees, talent management, you know, accessing and acquiring great talent, ensuring effective onboarding and socialization, strong socialization of new employees that aligns to the company values, developing employee capability, you know, training development plans through linking to the performance throughout the employment journey to ensure that they gain strong capabilities and competencies and take on new competencies. Ensuring fair performance and reward systems are in place. And probably one of the big ones is harmonisation. Ensure that employee relations terrain is harmonised and well-being is maintained to foster a high engagement and motivation. Next slide, please. This is AC 2.2. And this requires you to summarise the ways in which you can be customer focused and standard driven in your own context. So this is about you basically in your workplace or a workplace that you're familiar with. For coverage of this AC, you will need to highlight the importance of achieving and maintaining a strong customer focus within your role. It's pretty difficult because obviously the examples are going to be your examples, but you might consider strong linkage to company and your own personal key performance indicators, such as a growth of customer base, high customer satisfaction, going the extra mile, ensuring in integrity within the work that you do, and you could link that to the professional map. And you could consider internal and external sources, such as internal sources are your employees, colleagues, line and senior managers. Your external sources are your customers that you deal with, such as outsourced provisions and business partners. Next slide, please. So what I want to do now is go on to section 2, which is the practical activity, basically. And the scenario in section 2 is your manager has asked you to provide practical working examples of how the people practice team examines, interprets and presents the findings of data in different diagrammatical formats so it can be easily understood. She has asked you to use the information table 1, which is embedded in the assignment, about turnover rates as an example. The table shows the number of employees leaving different departments over a 3-year period, and you'll see that in an Excel spreadsheet. Next slide, please. So this covers AC 1.4 and 1.5. So starting with AC 1.4, this requires you to conduct common calculations to interpret organizational data. So to make the data more easily understood, you need to show as a percentage the number of employees leaving each department each year, and then present the overall total leaving rate for the whole organisation as a percentage for each year. As I mentioned earlier, we often convert raw data into percentage form because it makes it more easily understood, and it makes it more visual for an audience, for managers, or whatever you're presenting the data to. So it's a pretty straightforward and simple task. Next slide, please. So 1.5, AC 1.5, present the findings in different formats to enable informed decision making. This part is actually, once you've actually converted the data, you need to present it in different forms. So it's entirely up to you, but you need to consider the two most appropriate forms to display your findings so that it can be easily understood by your audience. Consider which ones give you the most suitable visual impact, such as a bar or a pie chart. There's other forms you can use, but those often are the main ones that people tend to use when they're presenting information to an audience. And also, from the analysis of your findings, you need to do some written comments on any issues that might be relevant that you see in the data, and recommend potential solutions. So is there any particular departments that are causing you concern? Is there any other underlying issues that you might want to indicate? And again, this can be quite generalized, but really, what is the data actually telling us, and what would be concerning you going forward? Next slide, please. So once you've responded to all the ACs and you've set out your assignment, your assessor will mark your work against each of the assessment criteria, marking descriptors, and will indicate where your work sits within the marking band range for each AC. And this is dependent on the quality of your answer. Obviously, within the level 3, it's fairly explanatory. So you really need to just explain. The higher marks will give you where you actually put a more comprehensive answer to the AC, will take you to the higher mark. So I just want to go over the 4 areas just to talk through these. So if you're getting a mark of nothing or a 1, it's a fail. So fails against an AC don't demonstrate sufficient level of knowledge and understanding or skill as appropriate to meet the AC. A mark of 2 will give you a low pass, and this is where you're able to demonstrate acceptable knowledge, understanding, or skill as appropriate to meet the AC. A mark of 3 will give you a pass, and this is where you will demonstrate a good level of knowledge, understanding, or skill as appropriate to meet the AC. And then finally, to achieve a high pass, you have to demonstrate wide and confident knowledge and understanding and skill as appropriate to meet the AC. Next slide, please. Again, that's just the box to show you from the CIPD assessment brief. So finally, what I want to just talk about here is some key pointers that you need to be sure of. When you finish your assignment, ensure that you remain compliant within the CIPD word count policy. Before submitting your assignment, it's really useful to get someone to proofread it and check for mistakes and typographical errors. At level 3, you're not required, but if you use or include references to theorists, models, academic literature, case study examples in your work, please remember to acknowledge these at the end of the work, please. And finally, I hope this webinar has provided you with necessary support and guidance in preparing and completing your assessment. So good luck and thank you for listening.